Our scripture today comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to loose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain have the workers from their toil? I have seen the busyness that God has given to everyone to be busy with. He has made everything suitable for its time. Moreover, he has put a sense of past and future into their minds. Yet they cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I know that there is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Moreover, it is God's gift that all shall eat and drink and take pleasure in all of their toil.
You know, you'd think that after singing about seasonality like this, the birds would realize there's also a time to ride horses and a time not to ride horses. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. You know, I've lived 5 years now, over 5 years in Nebraska, and you'd think that by now that I'd have some clue about the growing seasons. But quite frankly, if it weren't for the CSA box that I pick up every week, I would not have any clue at all. For those of you not familiar with CSAs, that stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And in February, Melanie, as a birthday gift to me, paid a particular farmer a certain amount of money to buy a half share in their crop for the season, and a lot of other people did too. And therefore, once the growing season started, every week we've received first it was a bag, now it's a box of that percentage of the produce from their fields. And it's been a really wonderful thing. In addition to just having some super fresh organic produce coming every week, I now have kind of a sense of what's in season and what's not. In fact, not only what's in season, but what point of the season we're at. So in the beginning of the spring, I remember we had to laugh one day. We picked up at that time, a bag, and in addition to everything else in there, there were 2 string beans. 2. The next week, 4. Next week, 8. And then the following week, a whole bag of string beans. Okay, I'm getting the sense of the flow here. 6 weeks ago, our first heirloom tomato made it into the box. And now, of course, our box is brimming with heirloom tomatoes. It's I'm starting to get this. It's really amazing, really, when you think about it, how much we have taken seasonality out of our lives when it comes to, if you walk the produce aisles of the supermarkets. I mean, who would guess what's in season and what's not? A little bit you can, but, I mean, when you're picking up things like blueberries in January, it's really? They're in season? Now, I confess I love to get blueberries in January, but I'm getting increasingly wary of what that's costing us. I mean, yeah, it costs literally a little bit more money, but it's a lot of gasoline to move blueberries from southern Mexico to Omaha in the dead of winter. Not to mention that little thing we keep hearing about called the carbon footprint. Scientists are telling us nowadays that the safe level of carbon in the atmosphere that's sustainable is 350 parts per million. Yet we've been above that level for many years. And in fact, this summer, we breached the 400 part per million mark. What's it costing us to have blueberries in January? Well, I don't know if eliminating blueberries from the supermarkets in January is going to solve that number or not, really. But look at, when you step back and realize how much we've eliminated seasonality from our lives, there are other costs we keep on incurring, where we just become completely unaware of seasons. For instance, just a couple of years ago, I was at the men's breakfast on Tuesday morning at the Garden Cafe, and it was June, and I was wearing this heavy woolen sport blazer coat, and one of the men said, "Don't you have a summer weight jacket?" And I'm like, "What's a summer weight jacket?" I mean, I actually didn't know what that was, and when he explained, it's like, I don't think I actually do have a summer weight jacket. And it's no wonder I didn't, because, I wake up in a temperature-controlled house that stays the same temperature all year long. I get into my temperature-controlled car. I drive on Tuesdays to a temperature-controlled restaurant and have breakfast with those gentlemen, and then drive to my temperature-controlled office and work there, and then I drive back to my temperature-controlled house, and it's all peachy. Why would I need a summer weight jacket, right? What's that costing? Maybe not just simply in terms of carbon or excess energy use. Ecclesiastes says that seasonality is built into the very order of creation. That seasonality was part of God's intention and design for our world. If we basically become oblivious to the seasons, I wonder what other parts of life we might be cutting ourselves off of if seasonality is fundamental to our existence and yet we're erasing so much of it. Could we actually be erasing our connection with fundamental aspects of life itself? Ecclesiastes says, yes, there's seasonality in planting, in the environment, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. But it also says there's seasonality is part of a lot of other aspects of life that have nothing to do with the earth's temperature. There's a time to kill and a time to heal, it says. There's a time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. If I had my druthers, there wouldn't be that latter kind of seasonality. It would all be about, I would kind of erase those first, parts there. It would all be about, there's a time to heal, a time to build up, a time to laugh, and a time to dance. That would be the season. That would always be in season. And those other things would never be in season. But could that seasonality, even embracing the darker elements of life, be part of what it means to be human on this planet? I remember quite clearly, when I was growing up, my parents never argued in front of my brother and I. Never. We never, in 18 years living in the Elnes house, we never saw our parents argue. Now, I'm sure that they did, but they always kind of kept it to a back room or someplace that we were not aware of. And why they did this? Well, they loved us dearly, and they seemed to have thought that arguing in front of their kids wasn't a loving thing to do, I guess. But that in itself had its costs. I'll never forget the first time I had a girlfriend, and she and I got into an argument. Having never seen an argument modeled in a loving relationship, I just assumed that if you have an argument with your girlfriend, that means the relationship is over. You know? Now, I don't know about you, but I have found that it's not particularly helpful to argue with someone when you are mentally writing them off at the same time. Doesn't go well. Trust me on this one. Sometimes those difficult conflicts, sometimes even those periods of doldrums, play a very creative and powerful role in a relationship. Sometimes it's not about growing apart, it's about growing into each other. It's about learning to love each other in ways that matter, in ways that last and outlast the seasons. You know, that seasonality, though, you ever heard Dr. John? He talks about spirituality as well, the seasonality, except from a little different angle. The way you listen to Dr. John, you realize that seasonality doesn't just simply have to do with helping us through those bad times. It actually helps us leverage the flow. You know the song I'm talking about, don't you? Oh, it goes something like this. Dr. John reminds us that sometimes we literally can be doing the right thing, but it might go badly for us simply, not because what we're doing is not right, but it's simply at the wrong time. We can be saying the right thing, but maybe at the wrong time. Us men tend to know about that kind of problem, don't we? Can I get an amen from any woman? I don't know. Sorry, don't mean to be sexist. No, but really, there sometimes, if you actually embrace the flow, the seasons, the fact that life does have an ebb and flow to it, you begin to realize that you can leverage that flow, that there are times when you could be doing the perfectly right thing, and when you receive bad results, it's not necessarily because what you're doing or where you're trying to move is the wrong direction. It's simply a matter of timing. And when you hit the right time, the right flow, you can leverage the energy. It's kind of like in Nebraska, if you try to plant a tomato in January, all you're going to get is like you're going to harvest snowballs or something. Not tomatoes. And yet, wouldn't it be too bad if we actually did that? We tried that, we didn't get the results we thought, and so we thought, oh well, I guess tomato growing is just impossible. I guess tomatoes just don't grow. But come summertime, of course, you can reap a bumper crop because you hit the season. You leverage the energy of the earth itself. Wow, tomatoes. I remember back in high school, in my junior year, in fact, some of you, how many of you are juniors? A couple, okay, yeah. It's kind of a stressful year for me, actually. I had this chemistry class, and I totally didn't get it. I totally didn't get it. Like, the more I studied, the lower my grades became, which made me kind of irritable, actually. I know it's hard for anybody to imagine me being irritable, but there was a time. Okay. And I was kind of irritable towards my parents, especially, and things kind of finally came to a head when my parents caught me slipping a no-dose caffeine tablet one night in order to stay up super late to study for my chemistry class. My dad finally sat me down and said, "Listen, son, you are going to drop this class. I'm like, what? Drop the class? I can't do that. And he said, oh, yes, you can. No. I mean, I had this whole scenario worked out in my mind if I were to drop chemistry class. I mean, obviously, if I dropped chemistry, I wouldn't get into college. And obviously, if I didn't get into college, I would never get a good job. I'd be working at McDonald's for the rest of my life. And obviously, I would then never have earn a living wage. And then, of course, obviously, then my life might end up kind of like, well, this guy's.
You're gonna end up getting daddy covered in cheese and living in a van down by the river.
Yeah, that's me. The van down by the river. Well, truth be told, I've never owned a van, let alone slept in one. I actually retook chemistry my senior year, and I aced the class. Straight A's, not a problem. So why is it that I could be failing chemistry one year and acing it the next? Well, there were a lot of reasons for that, but they all boil down to one thing: seasonality. It just wasn't the right time. They were doing the right thing, but not at the right time in my life. Hit the right time, leverage the flow, ace. So paying attention to those seasons can be really helpful, acknowledging them. But it's important also for us not to go too far with this. There is an unacknowledged problem in Ecclesiastes. I mean, they talk about this kind of built into the order of creation, this ebb and flow. So you kind of think, well, I never want to do the right thing at the wrong time then, because obviously that doesn't work well. And so if it's not the right time, I won't do it. But, bottom line, sometimes we're actually called to stand against the flow, to actually do our work out of season as well. In the 1800s, there was an English mathematician. His name was Charles Babbage. He was a mathematician and also a mechanical engineer. And Babbage, in 1860, came out with this massive blueprint for this really unusual machine. Had the machine been built, it would have consisted of nearly 25,000 parts, weighed 15 tons, and been 8 feet tall. It was never built. Consequently, he worked up plans for a new design, which he came out with in 1861, which was even actually more complex, more sophisticated. That never went into production either. Never even was a prototype built of this machine, ever. Well, actually, that's not quite right. His machine was built, finally, but not until 1991, 130 years after he had originally designed it. It was built by the London Science Museum. Why? Because Charles Babbage had invented in 1860 and 1861 the first programmable computer. They built this machine according to his original blueprints, and they strictly followed 19th century manufacturing tolerances. We've gotten a little more precise. They followed the 19th century tolerances to see if that machine would work. That computer, which he called the difference machine. And it did. It worked so well, in fact, that it was able to compute mathematical equations out to the 31st digit. Why didn't they build this in the 19th century? Why did they have to wait so long before we would get a computer? Were they crazy? No, they weren't crazy at all. They were simply human. There was nothing like a computer nothing even remotely like a computer in the context of anybody's lives in the mid-19th century. There was no purpose for it, no conceivable use. In fact, really, there was no need for his computer in the mid-19th century. I mean, there was no need to compute anything to 31 digits at all. I mean, they couldn't create anything with such precision anyway. So they couldn't wrap their minds around it, and there was no need. What he produced, in a sense, he planted a seed. It's like planting a tomato in January in Nebraska. It just wouldn't work. But thank God, Babbage didn't let that discourage him. Despite the fact that his stuff was never built, he continued to refine what he so clearly saw. Kept refining it. And none of his work was ever built out in his lifetime. And yet, when the world had a need for such a thing, guess what? Babbage is known to this day as the father of the modern programmable computer. When the world had a need for such a thing, the sun began to shine on the seed he had planted, and we know the results in our day. Now, sometimes we are called to act out of season, to stand against the flow, and maybe we'll never even know why, but the Spirit calls us to do so anyway. Certainly, that was the achievement of Jesus, wasn't it? It's certainly what we see in the founder of our faith. I mean, in a sense, Jesus and Babbage aren't that dissimilar with this respect. I mean, 2,000 years ago, Jesus came out with a grand design for life on this planet, the way life should and could be on this planet. But did any of us really get it? I mean, think about it. He outlined this great program for life in the Sermon on the Mount, a portion of which goes like this. Here's his difference machine. I say to you that listen, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to anyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. That's not mind-blowing enough. His plan continues in the very next breath. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies. Do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Nobody got that. Nobody got that. I mean, this central symbol here should, because nobody got his plan. In fact, not only did they not get it, they thought it was ridiculous, thought it was hopelessly naive, thought it was probably even dangerous. Love your enemies? Really? Can you feel that? Love your enemies? Yeah, what if you do that? You're weak, aren't you? Your enemies will only take you over. I heard that just in the news last week. In fact, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, with Babbage, he came up with this machine, and at least, decades later, people got it, and they built it. Jesus' plan was rolled out 2,000 years ago, and have we got it yet? Have we wrapped our minds around his program? Our hearts? Or do we think he's hopelessly naive? Just nicely pious, but we know better. Now that we've democratized the instruments of mass destruction, getting increasingly sophisticated every day for killing each other. Yeah, chemical weapons, that's nothing compared to biological weapons, nuclear weapons. All kinds of ways to creatively kill each other, and drones and all this other stuff. Knowing what you know now of where we're at now, if nothing changes in our world, nothing changes in the way we get along with each other, how many of you would give the world 500 years? A 100? I mean, isn't that kind of freaky? Human beings have walked this earth for a long time. And yet none of us would give ourselves 500 years, additional time, knowing what we know now. Maybe not even 100. How naive do you suppose Jesus' plan really is? I don't know about you, but I have read those Gospels and I have concluded 100 times in different places that Jesus really didn't know what he's talking about, that I know better than Jesus. Don't look at me funny. If that's never happened to you, you've never read the Gospels. But every time I've come to that conclusion, I have always found later that he did know what he's talking about, and I didn't have a clue. We need Jesus' plan more than ever. Literally, the future of human civilization as we know it depends upon that plan. Yet after 2,000 years and nothing's working, how great do you think the odds are that that plan's going to work now? 2,000 years we've had. How good are we now? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bum out your Sunday morning. But actually, I'm not at all bummed out about this. I'm actually deeply hopeful this morning. In fact, I can tell you quite honestly, I have not been so excited to be alive and be part of this wonderful faith we're in 30 years. I have not been so optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but optimistic as I am now. Why? Well, part of it has to do with just this analogy here. Babbitt's machine did not work. Was not accepted year after year after year after year. But what finally brought it into season was what? The world needed it. The world did not need his machine in the 1800s. It needed it. And the sun began to shine. And for the last 2,000 years, you could reasonably argue that the human species has not needed Jesus' plan. Yes, life would have been a lot easier if we would have done that. A few less genocides, a lot less pain. But bottom line, we've never needed his plan to really work in order to ensure the survival of the human species. But we do now. Could it be that for the first time since Jesus gave this plan, that the sun has finally begun to shine on it? That while his plan for the world has been a lot like planting tomatoes in Nebraska in January, now is the time for its fruition? Could it be that in our lifetimes, or not too long beyond, that this world will truly be a more peaceful place? That we will finally got why it is so much in our self-interest to love our enemies, and that we will actually do so and be loved by our enemies. I think so. I don't know so, but I think so. Because the seasons strongly suggest that the time is ripe. And not only that, but I don't think that this is something that's about to happen. One of the reasons why I feel cautiously optimistic is because I see this happening already. Right now, and for many years, we have been in the midst of the greatest great awakening that there has been in centuries. It is so vast and so deep that it's like swimming in the ocean. We're so surrounded by it that we can't even see what's around us. I mean, how many of us are really consciously aware that crime rates have plummeted in the world in the last many decades? We think they're all going up, don't we? Yeah, right? We don't even see it. But it's a lot closer to home than even that. I mean, I could go on all day with examples, but I'll just offer one. We can talk about all this later if you want. But think about what's happening just 6 minutes from Countryside Church. If you drive 6 minutes down Pacific Street, you will find one of the most marvelous projects that's come along in 1,000 years happening now. What is that project? Let's see. 6 minutes down, 131st and Pacific. There was a golf course there. Remember that? Yeah. Golf's pretty good, but not revolutionary. The Tri-Faith. The three great world religions, Christianity, monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. All three buying property together, building separate sanctuaries and a common community center. Why? Because they are learning to live together. And they are making a statement to the world that this is possible. There is more than one path to God, and we don't have to relinquish our distinctiveness in order to say that we believe that these others who are so different from us are part of the same human family, and that we can work together. I mean, that should make all of our heads explode that this is happening. I mean, do you realize that has not been possible for 1,000 years? But it's happening 6 minutes down the street from us. And the reason why we're not all just rolling in the aisles thinking, oh my God, this is amazing, is because we are so deeply tapped into this awakening that it is not particularly unusual. If you want to get an example of how deeply you are tapped into this awakening right now, without even realizing it, think about your own faith and beliefs, your own conception of the world. Do you live with a more expansive view of life now than you did 20 years ago? Or 10? Or even 5? Do you understand more about Jesus' program? Resonate with it more now than you did a decade ago? We're part of this thing. We're part of the greatest awakening that has happened in centuries. It is the right time, the right place. to take the Sermon on the Mount seriously. And of course, I might just be full of it. I might not know at all what I'm talking about. And I have to acknowledge that. That's true. But bottom line, I don't trust my judgment. I trust Jesus' judgment. This was his plan. And my best reading of our situation in the world suggests that this is the time to be bold with his plan. And while I could be wrong about that, the chances of being right are high enough that I am willing to devote my life energy, my time, my talents, my treasure to giving everything I have to enacting this, to being part of his plan for the world. How about you? As they say, 'tis the season. Amen.